Okay, today we are looking at the Cold War, Vietnam, and Korea, and it's going to be a very, very quick session, so we're calling it Cold War, Vietnam, Korea 101 for you. The ultimate questions which we are looking at is what is containment, and how did it impact the globe? How did the Korean War develop, and how did the Vietnam War develop? So we're looking at containment, which deals with the Cold War, then we're looking at the Korean War, and then we're looking at the Vietnam War. So we're looking at 3 wars today, which only 2 out of the 3 saw action. So the first question for our ultimate questions was, what is containment and how did it impact the globe? So real quick, we need to talk about the Cold War. The Cold War is a rivalry between the United States and the USSR, which is the Soviet Union. It lasted from the end of World War II in 1945 to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It was cold because there was never any really direct military confrontation. We never went up to the Soviet Union and said, here we are, we have our guns, let's start the war. So we threatened each other with blowing one another up, basically. It encouraged massive military buildup, a nuclear arms race, coming along with the nuclear annihilation, and espionage. Is basically a spy who is involved with the government in order to obtain information that's secret or confidential. So it was a lot of actions with individuals going over to the USSR, the Soviet Union, figuring out what they were doing it, bringing it back to the United States, then the United States making the nuclear bombs using the information that was given, and vice versa. Okay, and here's a picture just kind of representing the giant bear. The grizzly bear is the USSR. And then here we are down at the bottom. We are worried the USSR will spread its communism all around the world. Which brings us to our next point. Containment and Iron Curtains. And the Iron Curtains weren't actually made out of iron, in case you're wondering. Iron Curtain deals with the communists when they seize power and threaten a spread of communism. It is symbolized by the conflict between the West and the Soviet Union. It symbolizes the great divide between the countries that the USSR had control over and the countries that they didn't. So communism, the countries with communism, versus the countries that were democracies and not associated with the USSR. That's the Iron Curtain. Kind of like an invisible divide. And containment comes into effect because we tried to contain the USSR and keep them in their borders, and that was known as containment. Here are some pictures. Once again, this black line here, that would be the Iron Curtain. Here is a cartoon showing the Iron Curtain. No admittance. You are not allowed over in the USSR region any of the countries that they had power over, unless, of course, you were one of them. And Iron Curtain actually went through Germany and Berlin, and so as it comes to an end, which we'll talk about later, we have the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this is just a quick picture so you can see that. Alright, now we have to move on to the Korean War. How did the Korean War develop? Korean War 101. America said Korea was no longer an ally because part of them were communism, so we did not want to associate with them. However, that meant the USSR thought this would be a perfect opportunity to make it all communist and take it over. Brilliant idea, Soviets. So North Korea, with encouragement from the Soviet Union, invaded South Korea, which was a democracy, in 1950. Just 5 years after a world war. And the U.S. persuaded the United Nations to help them in the South. We pushed them past the original border, however, and that pushed the Southern Koreans all the way up to the border near China. And because of that, China got involved. And when it all is said and done, no one actually won the Korean War. We ended up still in a divide. It's still in a divide today, as we have talked about in class, with the North Koreans still having the nuclear annihilation threats all the time, and the South is still a democracy. So it ended in a stalemate. And here are some pictures. You have the North as communist and the South as a democracy. Okay, then we got to talk about the Vietnam War. What is the Vietnam War? How did the Vietnam War develop? It began in 1959. It was split into two, with the North under Ho Chi Minh as a communist, so very similar to Korea, and the South under Dinh Diem, which is a democracy. Now, the Vietnam War was led by the Viet Cong, and these were units to unite the country, and that was supported by the United Nations and the United States. So here we were thinking, all right, we got to make sure democracy wins and communism doesn't spread. So that was the whole idea behind the Vietnam War, which was basically the whole idea behind the Korean War. We'll get more into how the Vietnam War ended and battles of the Vietnam War later. Here are some pictures, though. We used Agent Orange in the Vietnam War, which was a pesticide that caused harmful effects and deformations within the human body, which is very similar to that of the atomic bomb. Alright, so our ultimate questions, which we were looking at, is what is containment and how did it impact the globe? I want you to think about that last part. How did it impact the globe? We know containment is trying to contain communist countries. How did the Korean War develop? Between the North and the South, the North being communist, South being democracy, and we wanted the South to be all democracy and the North too. And then there was pressure from the Soviets to make it all communist. So that is a conflict. How did the Vietnam War develop? Again, North is communist, South is democracy, and we wanted it all to be democracy, but other countries wanted it all to be communist. That's going to be a problem and cause conflicts. So your bonus question is, how did the containment impact the globe, and how did it encourage the Korean and Vietnam War? All right, that ends the podcast. Please look at the EdCanvas site for this week. There are some great videos and some great resources there for you that help you understand the Vietnam and Korean War a little bit more, since we have to move through these very quickly. Okay, let me know if you have questions.